TelecomTV, where ICT connects.
Hello, this is TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick, reporting from Silicon Valley in Northern California in the USA, and I'm talking with Don Clarke, who is Head of Network Evolution Innovation with BT, British Telecom. Don, welcome. We're here at this fourth ETSI meeting of the NFE ISG, Industry Standardization Group. What has been achieved to date, and why is the work so important for service providers and for the industry in general?
Thank you, Martin. So the Network Functions Virtualization Industry Specification Group, as we call ourselves, it's quite a tongue twister, was founded we founded it last October. The ETSI Director General approved that. We came to ETSI because it was a forum that was open to the global membership with very low fees. So we were particularly keen to have inclusiveness of the smaller software players in particular. And we've been working with those on proof of concepts up to that point. And we realised quite early on last year that unless the operators collaborated with each other, that we wouldn't achieve economies of scale, commonality, standardisation of the main core components of a network functions virtualisation infrastructure. So what we did is we formed the ETSI ISG, NFE ISG as we call it, and we've been working for about 10 months on identifying what are the common requirements, what is an architectural framework, what is the terminology that we could use across the industry, because a lot of these terms actually are completely new. So, for example, network functions virtualization, we coined that term in our first white paper published last October to make it very clear that this was about network functions virtualization and not some vague term that people couldn't get a hook onto. And the last 10 months has been intensive work across 4 working groups, 2 expert groups, to identify what are those architectural framework components that we would need to standardise or at least identify common approaches for, so that the industry could put together solutions from multiple vendors in an open ecosystem, so that we could then buy those products. And so I think what the major achievement for us is, first of all, is to get the industry forum off the ground, and that's taken quite a lot of time and effort on the part of everybody. It's setting out terms of reference that would attract the major players in the industry, including the network operators, to structure a work program that was, productive in the sense of being able to encourage debate and inclusive and consensus driven. So that's a major achievement in itself. And I think today, as you probably know, we've got oversubscription to this meeting. We've got 28 service providers in the forum and over 160 companies, and that's grown from a meeting in June last year in Paris to something which, as you can see today, is a major thing. So that's very, very important. But actually getting the outputs out has been a major, major effort. So to publish 4 consensus documents and a call for proof of concepts across the industry, which has built the signature of all of those companies behind it, I think is a major signal to the industry that NFE is an important approach that we want to take.
So give us some real-life examples of how you are deploying or facilitating the deployment of NFV in the network.
Yeah, that's a good question, Martin. I mean, clearly the industry is interested in implementation and deployment. So for us, from the very start of the work in BT, when we were looking at experimentation in the lab, we realised that implementation was the real focus of what we want. So rather than theoretical papers or grand visions, we wanted to encourage the industry to actually implement this stuff and to innovate. And because network functions virtualization is about software networking, it's converting functions into software components that run on industry standard servers, we realized that the software industry had an important part to play in that. And software is a very fluid kind of environment. You have everything from very large programs directed by major companies to small projects coming out of the open source community. We want to leverage all of those. And so a major founding principle of the ISG was to promote proof of concepts across the industry. And we began with that as one of the founding principles, was to encourage implementation through proof of concepts. But what we didn't want to do is to go too early to the industry with a proof of concept idea, because that would divert the industry away from the most important thing, which is around specifications. And so we waited about 6 months before we did the call for action. And also we want to have the proof of concepts focused around our documents and the reference points which are there. So I think what you're going to see over the next few months, and indeed starting at the SDN and Openflow World Congress in Bad Homburg, where we published our second white paper, you will have seen there the first evidence that the industry is coming together to implement in a multi-party environment proof of concepts around the NFE. So in terms of deployment, you'll see different operators moving at different speeds, depending on their investment profiles and which waves of investment synchronize up with NFE. You'll see vendors launching products already, and that's exciting. But you'll also begin to see network operators announcing trials, which we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and you're well aware of those. But as far as the ISG is concerned, we literally launched our proof of concept in the last 2 weeks, and we've got a session tomorrow where we'll be clarifying what are the constraints and opportunities and what does a good POC look like from the industry point of view. And then the advantage for the industry is that if a vendor group get together to implement a POC, then they're going to have the eyes of 28 operators on those POCs, right? So suddenly you've got this sharing of knowledge and learning right across the industry from that activity, and that is going to itself bring forward some of those deployment decisions amongst the operators.
SDN and NFE exist separately. They're not completely independent, but they work together better, don't they? Why is that?
That's an excellent question, Martin. And in fact, when we created the framework for the first white paper, which we produced in October last year, the question came up, well, how does NFE relate to SDN? And that's a great question. And in fact, we were launching the NFE initiative at the SDN and Openflow World Congress. You'll notice the title is the SDN and Openflow World Congress. And so there was a perception in my mind that how will the SDN industry perceive this document once it arrived there? And so we wanted to make sure that the positioning within the document was as correct as we could make it, given our understanding of where NFE fits in the industry. And so there is a statement in there which is really, I think, completely right, even a year on down the line, which is that they are complementary in the sense that you can deploy an NFE capability in your network with fairly minimal changes to the existing OSS, depending on the scenario, right? But SDN is in its own right is a transformational in the sense that it separates the control of a network from the connectivity or the data plane of the network, and that's a fundamental shift in the design of networks. But that implies on its own some quite significant changes in the way that operators view and implement OSS. So you've got these two sides of this world, right? But as we've gone through the maturity of the industry, understanding how NFV, what the benefits of that are, they begin to see how you apply SDN techniques to that and you increase the utility of the NFV infrastructure. So these two things actually are turning out to be symbiotic, actually. One is driving the other because there's a sense of excitement in the NFV community. Yes, we can implement this, but if we apply SDN techniques to that, we get some of the benefits that you wouldn't otherwise do. And that in itself has driven some of the SDN work. So both of us, but the two worlds are not yet completely joined up, right? We have the NFV ISG and we have, for example, the Open Networking Foundation doing the excellent work that they're doing on OpenFlow.
Coming from what you've just been saying, I want to put another question to you, which is about OSS. OSS, as you say, is a mess and all over the world. Will SDN and NFE in particular have an effect on OSS and transform it?
I think it will have an effect, Martin, for sure, because if nothing else, it's actually brought out a very intensive discussion across the industry about OSS, right? Because clearly NFE and SDN do have implications for OSS. But if you read the second white paper that we published 2 weeks ago, there's a very carefully crafted statement in there about OSS. Actually, we started off with a much bigger section on OSS inside that document. But because we were trying to get consensus across a very broad base of operators, representing it's 25 operators, okay, so quite a significant number have signed up to that. The OSS question is so significant that it would be hard to get a single answer from all of the operators on what should be the shape of the future OSS and what is the journey and steps that you would take to get there. So we've got a carefully crafted statement in there, which actually in essence says there are two paths for operators. There's the operators that for whom OSS is, as you correctly say, a major significant part of our networks, and transforming or even making even quite minor changes to OSS are significant activities and cost a lot of money and resources. So some operators, in looking at the SDNNFE landscape of the future, they're looking at how can they introduce those techniques without too much initial impact on OSS. So the path is, if you like, an incremental one, looking at how we introduce NFE in scenarios that give major benefits for us, clearly, but don't require a big OSS transformation in one step. Then there's another operator group that see this as a transformation opportunity for them. In other words, the scenarios that they envisage for NFE and SDN won't be delivered without that transformation. So in other words, they've dimensioned the benefits to trigger that transformational change. And so you see these two paths documented in there, which I guess is not that helpful because you probably will ask, well, which operators are on which path? And I just go and talk to them, okay? So just go and talk to them, and then you'll find that out. But that's really how I see that question at this point in time. But as we go through, and even at today's conference, we've had at least one very incisive question about, so what is the journey for you on the OSS? And it's a superb question, but we can't right now answer that in a consensus way, and that's what we've basically outlined in that white paper.
Don Clarke, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark.
TelecomTV, where ICT connects.